and if you hear nothing else today, please hear this. Forgiveness is God's gift for the purpose of healing for those who have been harmed. Let me say that again. Forgiveness is God's gift for the purpose of healing to those who have been harmed. Let me also say that forgiveness is not condoning or pardoning harmful behavior. Forgiveness is not healing the wound lightly. And forgiveness is not always possible. And finally, forgiveness is not the same thing as reconciliation. To perpetrators, accountability is God's gift to perpetrators. It is God's gift to those who have harmed another for the purpose of repentance, of turning around, of changing, so that you also may ultimately be forgiven. To victims and perpetrators alike, reconciliation may eventually come, but only if it is desired by the victim. It is not the perpetrator's right to demand or ask. And to bystanders. Bystanders play a positive role in forgiveness by helping to establish an environment of accountability and distributive justice. Or they play a negative role, becoming enablers by allowing the culture of abuse to continue. I stand before you as a victim survivor who in earlier times showed the potential and acted as a perpetrator, and who in life have often been a bystander. My father was an extremely domineering, chauvinistic male. And in my life, my first refuge from the emotional abuse at home was a congregation that welcomed me as a young teen. It was there that my faith journey began. Over the years, I have struggled with my heritage as a victim. It manifested itself in me most often as a severe depression. And my coping mechanism throughout most of life was flight. I left home for the first time at age 14. That absence from home lasted for about 6 months until my father came and found me and gave me an ultimatum to either come back home or be turned over to the juvenile court system. And I went back home. But the very moment I turned 17, I immediately dropped out of school, joined the military as a means of escape. In my journey to wellness, I tried medications for depression. They worked for a while, but eventually the depression would come back. Next, I tried counseling while continuing to work, and that also worked for a while, but the depression came back. And as the depression started to return and to build within me, I was given an opportunity to join the national staff of the church, and that change of work venue provided for me a path of escape, a path of flight. And it distracted me enough that I could stuff down the issues that caused the depression for the next 15 years. But after 15 years on national staff, I returned to parish life, and soon after, the old depressions soon began to resurface. This time with a vengeance. So I spent a year on disability, and I took the time necessary to work on my issues through counseling, through meditation, and through prayer. And that journey led me from death to resurrection and new life. I am indebted to so many for my journey, but mostly to my partner in life, Marcia. Two of my 6 siblings have shared my journey to become wounded healers. My older sister, now deceased, became a Buddhist monk, and my older brother, now almost 50 years sober, became an alcohol drug rehabilitation counselor who works primarily with the throwaway cast-off of our society called veterans. The remainder of my family, I had a younger sister who died of ovarian cancer, while my 2 other siblings are still caught up in the victimization of domestic violence, and living out the legacy of my family. In the forum on the first week of this series, Elaine Whitefeather talked about the fact that nothing in your life, nothing is irredeemable. That God can and does use even our darkest moments as tools through which transformation and resurrection and new life can come. Last week in Forum, Robin Bassinger talked about the power of God in our lives. That was and is good news, not only for victim survivors, but it's also good news for perpetrators and for bystanders. The message is God is not done with us yet. For me, the issues which triggered the emotional abuse in my home were money, death, and sexual identity. And in the course of my professional life, I was part of a team that founded Hospice of San Joaquin way back before hospices were commonly known. As a result, I am one of President George Herbert Bush's points of light. And when I was called to join the national staff of the church, it was as a stewardship specialist. But it was not until I was on my year of disability that I connected the dots. And in talking with my brother about our shared journey as victims of abuse, he pointed out to me how my father's issues with money and death were transformed in my life and redeemed through my work in hospice and stewardship. My rejection of my father's role model of maleness has driven me throughout my ministry to reject the trappings of power associated with patriarchy. One of the ongoing issues in my life is I continually try to renew and redefine what it means to be a white male in America today. A journey I wish all of my brothers would undertake. Through the power of God, I have come to a point in my life where my dominant emotion now is one of thankfulness rather than any lust for power or entitlement. Thankfulness for the journey, thankfulness for the people who have journeyed with me along the way, and even eventually thankfulness for my father, whom I deeply loved and was ultimately able to learn to forgive and be reconciled. But I think that forgiveness was and is the hardest part of the journey. And yet it remains perhaps one of the most crucial parts of our being brought to new life. It's difficult because the wounds are so deep. So deep that the scars will never go away. But forgiveness is not about forgetting. Forgive and forget is not in the Bible. That's Shakespeare, folks, not God. It's not about forgetting. It's not about diminishing the importance of what has happened to you. In fact, it is quite the opposite. It is about learning to own and to name what happened to you, and to name it clearly. Name it not as something which you deserved or something which you brought on upon yourself, but rather as something which was done to you. Naming it not as a description of who you are, as in blaming oneself for being sinful and unclean, as the church would have you confess, but naming it clearly as an evil done to you for which, once properly named, you can release its poison and its vile and its destructive image making. Listen to me. There is nothing you can ever do that justifies another's abuse.